The loss of sight from disease is a threat that recognizes no racial, social, or economic boundaries. That's why for over a decade, the IRRF has supported clinician and research scientists worldwide in their efforts to discover the causes and cure of age-related macular degeneration, glaucoma, and other eye diseases that impair or destroy vision. Visit us at www.irrfonline.org. The International Retinal Research Foundation, saving sight through research.
For 65 years, Alcon has partnered with eye care professionals to preserve, restore, and enhance sight globally. Alcon continues to innovate in treatment of the world's leading cause of preventable blindness, cataracts.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Charlie Kelman a big round of applause.
Thank you. Welcome to the longest standing bar mitzvah in New York. Why me? I mean, look at me. Here I am on a makeshift stage.
Who was Charlie Kelman?
A lot of people thought he was just a charlatan.
Who is this damned upstart?
A nutcase.
He just did not care what people thought about him.
You know, people say to me, Charlie, you're a doctor. What are you doing up on the stage?
This is the story of a man whose contribution to medical science has brought sight to millions worldwide.
He was ingenious.
He was driven.
Through the invention of an unlikely machine. It's the story of a man who reached the pinnacle of success in the wrong profession.
What would have made Charlie Kelman happy? No matter what success he achieved, and he achieved great success, he still did not feel fulfilled.
He wanted to be a star.
Charlie was a peculiar combination, the showman and the inventor, two sides of this one personality. To achieve what he achieved, he needed both sides.
Charlie loved music. Let's just start there, that Charlie loved music. He showed pictures of him basically holding some little musical instrument in this funny little outfit that, you can imagine in the 30s was, the hot outfit for a kid. And he had some musical instrument in his hand.
As a child, Charlie Kelman was obsessed, like much of the country, with big band music. Charlie began playing the harmonica as a toddler. In 1936, at age 6, he performed on the Horn and Hardart Children's Radio Hour. Soon he was learning the saxophone and clarinet as well. Charlie grew up in a modest apartment in the Forest Hills section of Queens. It was a short trip to Manhattan, and as a teenager, Charlie often made pilgrimages to see the best bands perform live.
Sitting in that audience, that's all I ever wanted to do, was just be on that stage with Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw.
His parents were supportive of his passion, but only to a point.
You know, I always wanted to be an entertainer. And when I was a kid, my dad caught me sneaking out of the house to go run away play with Louis Prima. And he said, Charlie, it's your life. You can do whatever you want with it. You can be a saxophone player, you can be a singer, you can be a songwriter, whatever you want. But first, you'll be a doctor.
Charlie's father, a Jewish immigrant from Greece, was a self-made man and an inventor. His biggest brainstorm was the first cellophane Christmas wreath. But to his lifelong regret, Kelman never owned any of his inventions, losing out on untold riches and prestige. His disappointment fueled ever higher expectations for his only son. But even as a boy, Charlie had other ideas.
His parents said, "Why can't you just be like the neighbor's son?" His mother would say, "Listen to the big shot, he's got an idea." It was said with great mocking. He always felt put down, and I think that desire to be validated became ever so strong.
He always felt inferior. His height, the fact that he was a little bit short. Charlie was a skinny, funny-looking kid, and he was always not really the good-looking guy who got all the girls in high school.
Charlie's music was an escape that helped him get over his teenage insecurities, and it became the sole focus of his life. His schoolwork suffered, yet despite mediocre grades, he was accepted to Tufts University. But in his freshman year, Charlie was hit with tragic news that would color the rest of his life. His father was diagnosed with cancer. The family was devastated.
It was his dream more than mine to see me become a doctor, so I really accelerated everything. I went to night school and summer school.
Charlie graduated in just 2 years and went off to medical school at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. But in 1956, he received the news he had been dreading. With only 6 months until graduation, his father died. Charlie was an ocean away.
I think he was really very sad that he wasn't there. It became more important to fulfill his father's dream because he felt he wasn't there.
After completing his medical degree, Charlie returned to the U.S. and was faced with the challenge of choosing a residency. Charlie chose ophthalmology, which he had heard provided the most flexible hours, giving him more time for music making. But despite his motives, Charlie soon found himself intrigued with his work. Ophthalmology dealt with one of the most wondrous parts of the human body, the eye.
It's the only organ in the human body where we can look inside and see what's happening inside the eye without imaging techniques or surgically opening an anatomical site. We can, for example, determine the health of a human being oftentimes through the eye. We can diagnose diabetic changes in the back of the eye. We can often diagnose high blood pressure by the way the blood vessels look in the back of the eye.
The eye is something which gives people character. It's the organ that most people would least like to lose the use of.
There's a great deal of mysticism about the eye. From ancient Egyptian manuscripts, the eye was part of the sacred system, the eye of Horus, the eye that you see on the dollar bill. There's a mystic connotation. You don't hear that from gynecologists, you don't hear that from proctologists or orthopods, but the eye you can talk about. It's a mystical symbol.
Nancy, I'm going to take the bandage off.
We can take people who are losing their vision and we can restore their vision with a surgical procedure. That's very emotional. Whether you do it twice or 10,000 times, it's still as magical. It never, ever, ever gets stale. It never, ever gets old.
Charlie.
The results are relatively instantaneous. I see the patient who cannot see, who is blind, and within minutes after surgery, they're seeing. They say, "Oh, this is the most wonderful thing," and I love that reaction. It's like audience applause.
" There were many reasons why ophthalmology was a perfect match for Charlie Kelman. He applied to Wills Eye Hospital in Philadelphia, one of the most prestigious and competitive ophthalmology residencies in the country. Though initially rejected, he showed up in person and managed to charm his way in. Yet Charlie's focus lay elsewhere. It was 1959, and young people everywhere were swaying to the tunes of superstars Frankie Avalon and Fabian, teenaged heartthrobs who sang sweet, often sappy songs.
Every boy like me needs a girl like
Charlie became obsessed with music. He spent hours rehearsing and writing similar pop songs. By day, he was an ophthalmology resident at Wills Eye Hospital, but by night, he was recording demos and trying to make connections in the music industry. He was torn between two forces that ruled his life, medicine and music. Charlie craved one, but was incomplete without the other. The struggle to find a balance would define his life. And then one day, like a miracle, it seemed his musical dreams were coming true.
I wrote a song that I thought would be very good for Frankie Avalon. I made a demo and I brought it up to Pete DeAngelis, the head of Chancellor Records that recorded Frankie Avalon and Fabian.
DeAngelis liked what he heard, so much so that he asked Charlie himself to record it. Nervous about what his medical colleagues might think, Charlie decided to take a pseudonym. He called himself Kerry Adams. For Charlie, it was the moment of a lifetime. The 30-year-old doctor was headed for fame.
telephone numbers. I got so many numbers of pretty girls I knew last summer at the shore.
Telephone Numbers earned 4 stars in Billboard and was a pick of the week at radio stations across the country.
He thought he was going to be a star. I think he was hoping that Kerry Adams was going to make it big. Then medicine would be the sideline, and entertainment would be his full life thing.
But the song's success, as well as that of its singer and songwriter, was short-lived. It was 1960. Musical tastes were changing, and Kerry Adams just didn't cut it. The latest dance craze was a thing called the twist. Sung by Chubby Checker, it rocketed to the top of the charts worldwide, and within days, pop music would never be the same.
He blamed Chubby's entrance at the time just when he was going to get this hit. He said, he came in and just kicked me off the charts, and that was the end of the whole thing.
Chancellor Records dropped Kerry Adams. Finally, Charles Kelman was ready to open his doctor's office. With his singing career over, Charlie decided to make a fresh start. He got married and started building a practice. Yet it wasn't enough. After his taste of fame, Charlie still wanted to be someone. The answer came in the mail. On July 17, 1962, Charlie's bi-weekly issue of Look magazine arrived. Featured was an article on Dr. Irving S. Cooper, the inventor of a cryosurgical probe. Cooper used extreme cold to destroy unwanted brain tissue, treating neurological diseases like Parkinson's. He was no mere healer and innovator. He was a superstar. And for the first time, Charlie realized that being a doctor could not only bring you respect, it could make you famous.
He was like a god in his profession at that time. So I called Cooper in his office, tried to get him on the phone. He wouldn't come to the phone. I sent him a letter. He didn't answer my letter. And I finally ended up waiting in his office to see him. He said, "Kelman, you're the most persistent son of a bitch I ever met. What do you want from me?" I said, "Dr. Cooper, I just want to use your lab a couple of days a week to try some things in ophthalmology. He said, well, okay, go ahead.
Once in the lab, Charlie began to experiment. He quickly sensed that cryosurgery could somehow be used to treat one of the major causes of blindness throughout history, cataracts.
We think of a river or a stream with a cataract. That means a flowing down, a rippling, a loss of transmission of light through the water. It becomes cloudy. This is a cataract. In the eye, the lens becomes cloudy, and that is a cataract. Cataract is not a growth. The cataract is not a disease. The cataract is a degenerative condition that occurs as the eye ages.
The lens, if it becomes cloudy, will block the light going through the pupil and decrease your vision. So you have the problem, how are you going to fix that? And there aren't any medications or drops that will make the lens go from cloudy to clear. So essentially the lens has to be removed.
Charlie went in at night and played in Cooper's lab and took a probe that was used to freeze the brain and touched the lens of a cat eye. And he pulled it out and he says, oh, that's how you fix cataracts. You touch the lens, you freeze the lens, and you take it out entirely.
Jubilant, Charlie named his invention the Kelman cryostylet. But before he could formally introduce it, he was trumped. A more established doctor presented his paper on the use of freezing in cataract removal. At the same time, a Polish ophthalmologist was also taking credit for similar work. But the worst was yet to come. Dr. Cooper, sensing the potential of the work Charlie had done in his lab, decided to expand on it. But instead of allowing Charlie to continue at the helm, Cooper dismissed him and hired a better-known doctor to replace him. Charlie was stunned and furious.
Here he is inventing something that's unique, and the chubby checker thing happens all over again to him. There it goes again, blew me off the stage again. And you don't do that to Charlie. He doesn't suffer it easily.
Charlie now assumed anything he did would surely be stolen from him again. He vowed to keep all future research a secret and set his goals even higher. He would not just explore refinements to the methods of cataract removal, but would rethink the very nature of cataract surgery. Dating back to the 1700s, cataract removal was one of the most common surgical procedures in the world. But it was also one of the most cumbersome.
Cataract surgery had been more hammer and chisel. We used scissors to cut the eye open, blunt instruments for removing the cataract.
The surgery required a large incision that went halfway around the eye. Recovery meant 8 to 10 costly days of immobilization in a hospital, followed by 4 to 6 weeks at home. And with the lens gone, the patient had virtually no chance of ever regaining clear vision again.
And patients were given very thick glasses. They were called post-cataract glasses to replace the lens, the cloudy lens that was removed from the eye. That was the state of the art in the early 60s.
When you put the thick glass on, it created a tremendous amount of problems. Everything was magnified. Things would jump into your vision from the side, and then they'd jump out, and then they'd jump back in again. And so there was a real disability with wearing these kind of thick glasses.
Charlie felt there had to be a better way than the standard method of cataract surgery.
I do remember making rounds with him in the hospital and seeing a patient with sandbags on the sides of his or her head. And I remember him telling me that this patient could die of pneumonia from a relatively minor procedure, and that affected him a lot.
Merely removing the cataract wasn't the problem, he proposed. The real problem was the giant incision you had to make to pull it out in the first place. He would develop a way to pull a large cataract lens out of the eye through a small incision. Charlie received funds for 3 years of work. His workplace was on the research floor of the venerable Manhattan Eye, Ear, and Throat Hospital on New York's East Side.
He had convinced the powers to be to give him some laboratory space on the 10th floor. He and his lab assistant, Cheryl, kept cages of cats there, and they were performing experiments to try to develop a small incision cataract technology. But Charlie was very secretive about it.
Science is committed to sharing. We need to share information. Not only final data, but developmental data. And clearly Kelman was not a sharer.
He was not well loved by a lot of his colleagues. There were nights when he slept in the laboratory because he didn't want anybody to get into the lab. And when you prioritize yourself that way, you begin to feel that people are coming after you.
We were in an area almost like hidden away by ourselves. And we were always conscious of anybody coming upstairs. The doors were never open. They were always locked.
Charlie channeled all of his energy into his new passion, medical research. The goal was to remove a cataract through a small incision by first breaking it up without causing trauma to the rest of the eye. As if playing a jazz melody on his beloved saxophone, Charlie began to improvise.
There were all sorts of extraordinary electrical handpieces with multiple different kinds of tips to try and encourage this lens to break up. There would be rotating brushes. There were little balloon-shaped bags that you could put bits of lens into to try and pull it out of the eye.
There was one device that I recall. It was a minified, like, meat grinder, something that was like a corkscrew.
He had a drill that would drill through a lens, thinking that then he could wash out the contents.
Then all that would happen is that the lens would spin furiously inside the eye and damage all the tissues irrevocably.
He had a tool which horrified me. It was a tube that had rotating points that were like prongs, and the idea that that would go in somebody's eye and macerate the lens, I just looked at it, I just got revolted. I said, there's no way that's going to work. You're going to tear up the eye.
Nothing worked. 3 years passed quickly. By 1966, Charlie's money and time were running out, and still he had nothing to show for all his work.
And then there was one of these extraordinary moments in medical history, or in any history, whereby something was happening to him, which was the scaling of his teeth, which made everything suddenly become clear.
I went for a haircut. My hair by this time was down on my shoulders. And then I went to the dentist, Larry Kuhn.
I took him into the hygiene room, and I had just gotten in a new machine to clean teeth. It was an instrument like this that had various tips. He saw the way it vibrated at thousands of times per second and saw the stream of water to cool off the end of the tip. He saw it and he was elated.
Now, I had had this eureka, aha sensation 1,000 times in those years. And I had it again. I said, I've got it. And I went back to the hospital, got a freshly extracted intracapsular cataract, brought it back to his office, and took his ultrasonic drill, and for the first time, I was able to gently subscribe lines onto the cataract without it moving away, without it jumping away.
Charlie's fundamental breakthrough enabled him to go back to his engineers and design a new device. And sure enough, his ultrasound probe quickly and effectively destroyed the lens when applied to animal eyes. Charlie was within reach of the elusive success and fame he had dreamed of for so long. The only thing remaining was to test the device on a living human eye. It wasn't long before he found the ideal test case, a blind man who was already scheduled to have an eye removed. But by now, Charlie's paranoia consumed him.
We had to sneak around and be very careful that somebody didn't, catch us. Charlie was just not going to let this leak out because they'd take it away from him.
There was a lot of cloak and dagger stuff that went on. He didn't want anybody to come between him and success with this technique.
This piece of equipment was quite big. It wasn't just a small piece of instrument. I was ready to put it in the OR, and then for some reason I said, I can't do this. So I put it into the nurse's locker room, and that's where I slept. I locked the door and I slept there with the instrument. I just didn't know what was going to happen that night. I was scared to death. And then in the morning, I got up, got my scrubs on, put the machine in the OR.
We had heard, only rumor, that Charlie was going to do his first case with this new technology, and that he was going to do it on a Saturday. I was actually a senior resident at that time. I happened to be in the hospital and was curious. I wanted to go in the operating room. It was off limits. There were curtains drawn. Couldn't see what's going on in the operating room. There was a sign on the door, "Do not enter infected room." It was almost like a skull and crossbones that you see on an iodine bottle.
When we started the operation, he did his incision, went into the eye, and then things were going along real well for a while. And then all of a sudden, all this stuff started happening in the OR.
He would be churning inside all the time. The possibility of screwing up, of messing up the eye. His father's pressure, the pressure from his colleagues, the disbelief they all had in him. And that first surgery, those were all parameters.
Charlie would hold the drill to go into the eye, and it was a heavy piece of equipment. And the longer you held it, eventually your hand just started shaking. Charlie would get upset, and he'd pull the drill out, and he would start sweating. He would slam some instruments down, but he finished the case, and he put a suture in the eye, and then he walked away.
The operation took 4.5 hours, and the patient's blind eye was damaged in the process. Charlie realized he needed more time to improve the procedure before operating on another human being. Nevertheless, he was convinced he would ultimately succeed.
If you're really as good as you think you are, then you can knock 'em dead. If you're really as good as you think you are, all the confidence is in your head. It's a world of illusion. It's a Hollywood masquerade. No one will know how scared you are if you put on a big charade.
In spring 1967, after almost a year of further refinement, Charlie began once again using his machinery on patients with blind eyes. He grew increasingly skilled with each attempt. By his fourth patient, he achieved success. But his single-minded obsession came with a heavy price. At home, his marriage was starting to fall apart. Eventually, he and his wife divorced. Charlie applied for patents on his invention. He called his new procedure phacoemulsification. Phaco from the Greek for lens, and emulsi meaning fine particles suspended in liquid. He then entered into a business relationship with Cavitron, the manufacturer of his prototype. Such a move was unheard of, potentially scandalous.
I was taught in medical school that it was unacceptable to be involved with any of the business aspects of medicine, and that the focus was to be always the patient.
That was very unique at that time. But I don't think that money ever dictated the reason Charlie pursued things. Money didn't motivate Charlie.
Charlie's going to nail this one. He's got this one. This is his. Nobody's going to take it away from him. Nobody's going to kick him off the stage.
This is, of course, the standard operation with the 180-degree incision and the sutures necessary to close that incision. This is the incision for this new operation, phacoemulsification.
From the beginning, Charlie's plan was to bypass the mainstream conventions of the medical world and promote his radical technique his way.
Charlie was so sure it was right, it colored everything that he did. And I asked him, you know, Charlie, why are you so rushed? Why do you not just publish the papers the way you would normally get something to be accepted? And he turned to me and he said, I don't have the time.
He always felt the breath of the Grim Reaper on his shoulders. He always did. He felt like he was going to die at a young age because his father died at such a young age. And I think that kind of drove him a lot.
Teaming up with Cavitron, Charlie set up an intensive program in which doctors would come to New York for an expensive week-long training course on his revolutionary procedure.
People learned by word of mouth because Charlie would teach Dick Kratz on the West Coast or Guy Connolly in Texas, and Guy Connolly would begin to do it and teach it, and he would tell Monis Graff in Chicago, and Monis would tell Jerry Freeman in Memphis, and Jerry would tell me, and it went on, but word of mouth. They would come, not in secret exactly, but they wouldn't promote the fact that they were studying with Charlie Kelman.
To me, it was a big deal. I took off a week from my practice. Charlie taught the whole course himself. He would not trust anybody else to even help, really, because he wanted to be sure that the first surgeon that he trained did the operation correctly.
Most surgeons who are doing cataract surgery were not using a microscope. So that was a major leap. And now you add putting a device inside the eye that vibrated at a high frequency, and it's hard.
I had a checklist of about 18 things to remember, and usually I didn't sleep at all a whole night long because each sequential step depended on the preceding step, and so each one had to be done correctly and in the proper order.
To my very dear, wonderful doctor friends who have come to take this course.
They came from all over the world to New York to learn his operation and his technique. And he would invite them all, make them sit through one of his shows.
Well, if you think I'm crazy and out of my cage, you're even worse off than me, I would gauge. You're out there listening, just think about that. Listening to me singing fly.
He kept people laughing and interested, and it wasn't bad.
Yeah. But what does it take to get up on the stage and sing?
He had a captive audience.
Nerve, moxie, or a word that some Irishman there taught me tonight, chutzpah.
I came back from New York to Dallas, and I ran into a lot of my colleagues at the American Academy of Ophthalmology, and I said, phacoemulsification is the greatest thing I've ever seen. It's going to revolutionize cataract surgery. And I met nothing except skeptics.
One reason for skepticism was clear. An artificial lens had been developed that could be inserted in the eye, vastly improving patients' vision. By the early 70s, doctors were starting to implant these intraocular lenses after cataract removal. So even if a surgeon used phacoemulsification for extraction, he would then have to enlarge the incision to insert the rigid lens. What was the point of small incision surgery when the incision had to be made bigger anyway to accommodate a new lens? So Charlie expected resistance, but he had no idea that a storm was brewing.
Ophthalmology has one leading institution, and that's the American Academy of Ophthalmology. It's the big brother that sits on your shoulder, and it's the conscience and the driving force of a profession.
I think then it looked like the old Argentine system where a junta, or a small group of people, basically controlled the thought processes of information that was going to be disseminated as good and acceptable to the practitioners of the day. And Charlie was kind of intimidated.
It's not surprising to know that the spokespeople of the Academy were not generally favorable to this guy who was not within the organization. And so he ran into a buzzsaw.
You had a chairman of a department in Baltimore that basically felt that this represented malpractice. You had a chairman in Boston who felt this procedure was absolutely ridiculous. These were great men. They made major contributions to ophthalmology. They were academic icons, if you will. The concerns that they had were concerns about what the long-term effects would be in terms of the cornea, and what would happen to the cornea when you take a vibrating probe and put it inside the eye.
When I started doing phacoemulsification, we were always told by the people who were decrying the thing that you had to destroy 50 corneas before you learned how to do it. Many early patients did not do so well because the back of the cornea, the endothelial cells, had been so damaged by the operation that they then required a corneal transplant.
There was an awful lot of word of mouth about the risks of his operation. And it's true that some of Charlie's cases turned out badly, but worse for him, a lot of the cases that were done by some of his enthusiasts and fellow people had complications.
Charlie's detractors started to gain momentum. A group of prominent ophthalmologists at the National Eye Institute declared phaco experimental, putting in jeopardy Medicare and insurance coverage and exposing phaco surgeons to malpractice and the loss of their licenses. And it got worse. In the spring of 1973, the Welsh Cataract Surgical Congress, a biennial meeting of cataract surgeons, devoted much of its 5-day schedule to phaco. The Congress was organized by Dr. Robert Welsh of Miami, an outspoken critic of phaco. Welsh publicly decried Charlie's unprofessional hucksterism and made sure the conference provided a large forum for Charlie's critics.
The 1973 Third Biennial Cataract Surgical Conference became the crucible in which phacoemulsification was thrust, whereupon it was left there to roast and boil. As we all filed into the auditorium before the session started, patients who had had horrible failures were brought to line up by the door. Their eyes were drooling with tears and discomfort.
Many of the speakers at the conference were brutal in their criticism. The final session was an open mic. Each speaker was allotted 20 seconds, and one doctor after another stepped up and spoke out against phaco.
The more clever you could be in criticizing phacoemulsification, the more grins you would get from the audience and more support, because really the audience in general was made up of practitioners who were hoping in their own heart of hearts that phacoemulsification did go on the skids and didn't happen.
You take a 50-year-old or a 45-year-old surgeon who's been doing it this way from the time they're 25, and used to doing it that way and getting great results according to them and to their patients, and switch it, there's going to be controversy.
That the old-timers are vocal in their opposition may have reflected not simply medical caution, but turf protection.
Charlie had always sought refuge from his critics in his music, but now hit upon a novel way to circumvent the establishment. While neither his cataract surgery nor his amateur music making brought him fame, the two elements together made for great PR. So Charlie began to actively court the lay press, to the horrified disapproval of his colleagues. In 1974, the American Academy of Ophthalmology finally decided to weigh in the ongoing battle over Charlie's procedure. A committee was appointed to compare phacoemulsification with the standard cataract operation. A negative decision by the Academy could shut down phacoemulsification forever. The committee reported its findings at the annual conference in Dallas.
This committee was charged by the Academy to determine the efficacy of the cataract operation as it is performed today.
The meeting was chaired by Dr. Richard C. Troutman, one of phaco's most vocal critics. Charlie was concerned that statistics could be manipulated, so he arranged for an independent collection of data to be included in the committee's findings. But even with that, Charlie had no idea what the final verdict would be.
Phacoemulsification is, in all probability, as effective in restoring vision after cataract as our currently practiced techniques, but certainly no more so. This decision is only a draw. The currently practiced cataract operation is, in many cases, not only the preferred method, but the only method to be used.
The Academy's failure to embrace phaco dealt it a serious blow. Charlie remained ostracized and scorned by many of his colleagues.
I think in another person that would be moved towards depression. In Charlie, it pulled him towards, that's not going to happen, I'm going to show you kind of thing.
He had this really rip-it-to-them side of his personality. He was invited to Mount Sinai to present his material. The applause was scant at the end of the whole thing. All of a sudden, rhythm section came out when we started to play jazz, and these dancing girls were dancing. Horrified everybody. I mean, broke me up. We couldn't stop laughing. It was just right in their faces.
Charlie basically spit in the eye of the establishment. You know, he'd wear high-heel shoes and a stripe down the side of his pants. This didn't help matters.
With nothing left to lose, Charlie escalated his public relations effort. On February 21, 1975, ophthalmologists all over the country who happened to turn on their television sets at 11:30 p.m. were in for a surprise.
He is one of the foremost ophthalmologists in the world. He's been written up in virtually every major publication as the result of his fabulous work, incredible work in cataract surgery. Would you welcome Dr. Charles Kelman?
He took his case to the public, and he took it right to the Johnny Carson show.
I suffered from conjunctivitis and still do occasionally. Is there any cure for that?
Is this a professional question?
Oh. Let's see, taking into account the fee for here.
This was like pouring kerosene on a fire. This was announcing it to the world. Hey, look, I just built a better mousetrap, and you better look at my mousetrap.
You called me an ophthalmologist, which is great.
I remember my residency, the chairman of my department, I tried to get the hospital to buy a phacoemulsifier, and he just refused because of his dislike for Charlie Kelman. And he just knew what kind of a man he was, and he wasn't going to have that instrument in the place.
Charlie knew what he was doing. What he was doing was giving him greater exposure. As a result of that exposure, it was watched by, I'm sure even then, millions of people. His practice just took off in New York.
Charlie was invited on other national talk shows. The Saturday Review, Time, and People magazine all ran stories on his jazzy double life. And Charlie played the part, smoking cigars, wearing platform shoes and sideburns, and of course, playing his beloved saxophone. He thumbed his nose at the opposition, name-dropped celebrity patients, and raked in huge profits from his patent.
It was a revolutionary period. There were multiple camps, and there were the people that adored Charlie for what his development was. There were people that were jealous of him for the money that was being made in the process. You can see where this kind of animosity can build. And so he had to suffer with that.
Phacoemulsification certainly was a tumultuous ride, but there was an end point. Slowly but surely, people changed, and often they changed quietly. People who were adamant against it found friends who could do it and actually were taught how to do it, and then you just didn't hear them vocalizing anymore.
In 1984, phacoemulsification finally got the boost it needed when the FDA approved an intraocular lens that could be folded in half prior to insertion. Invented by Dr. Tom Mazzacco, the Mazzacco Taco, as it was nicknamed, meant that small incision surgery finally made sense. Charlie's experience with phaco mirrored other trends in medicine. In the 1970s, Congress voted to accelerate approval of medical devices. As a result, the medical device industry took off in the 1980s.
The divide between the pure academic and the world of business disappears over the course of the 1980s, and it's certainly gone now. Under federal legislation, academic medical centers are encouraged, really encouraged, to share their bench findings with industry. The idea that somehow or other there's the pure academe and the dirty business world is completely outmoded and outdated.
Within the United States and even worldwide, ophthalmology was changing. Charlie had really been on the outer fringe from really the early get-go, the 60s. But there was just a huge shift. It wasn't until the mid to late 80s that some people would say, well, you know, this phaco guy who's been down there on 64th Street, he's not wrong. This thing is coming. Those small incisions are gonna be important. He's right.
Charlie continued his practice and watched as phacoemulsification slowly became the norm for cataract surgery in the United States. His quest for invention never ceased. He created his own intraocular lens and worked to refine a variety of surgical procedures and instruments for ophthalmology and other fields. Charlie remarried. Finally, it seemed, he could enjoy his success.
He took flying lessons and he learned how to fly. And he took voice lessons so he could improve his voice. And he wanted to write a book.
I want to show them the book so they don't miss this unusual but certainly compelling story through my eyes. The story of a surgeon who dared to take on the medical world. And you forgot to add "and won."
That remains for the reader. Some people may think I lost.
He was never fully satisfied. He had this insecurity in a way. He would say to me, I have this thought sometimes that they're gonna figure me out, that I'm not everything that they think that I am. And he was, but something inside of him.
He always was a loner. Through his entire career, he really felt that he was doing everything on his own.
I think Charlie yearned for the identity of the great contributor that he really was. And there was always this sort of hanging back of certain people who said, yeah, but he was a difficult fellow, or yes, Charlie was an egomaniac, or words to that effect.
Charlie seemed to ignore the residual ill will from the phaco battles of the 70s. Medicine had never been his greatest passion, and now Having achieved a success far greater than even his father had dreamed, he turned his focus back to music.
Often we would travel and we would be somewhere listening to great music on a cruise and in some fancy party. He would say to me, if it wasn't for my father, I would be that guy with the saxophone. Because it left to him, music was what he would have followed.
If you had to pick one, which would you pick?
Well, there are basic needs in life: clothing, shelter, food, love. But there's a need I don't think that's recognized, and that's a need for many people to do something else. And very often they go back to one of their childhood dreams.
The Atlantis Cabaret Theater is pleased this evening to present Dr. Charlie Kelman.
Charlie put together a show for himself that he performed at parties, medical events, fundraisers, even renting out Carnegie Hall. He soon acquired an agent and landed an ongoing job performing at the Atlantis Casino in Atlantic City.
My business is high business. I know what to do. One day you can wake up and you're in the dark.
Watching his performances could make you squirm a little bit, but Charlie managed to pull it off. It was just accepted as part of who he was, being center stage, almost like a child, you know. Look, Mom, no hands.
Since my racket is eye cataracts, my Cadillac's new.
By the 1990s, after so many years of being an outcast, Charles Kelman slowly began to be recognized for his accomplishments.
I think he had resentments that people didn't accept him at face value. But I think over time that went. I mean, once it was recognized around the world that what he'd invented was something which was going to change millions of people's lives, once the accolades started to appear, this side of him changed very considerably.
My business is high business. There's no business like show business, and that's why I'm here with you and you and you and you and you. Thank you.
In November 2003, the Academy of Ophthalmology finally recognized Charles Kelman with their highest honor, the Laureate Award. He died of cancer 6 months later, on June 1, 2004, at age 74. Posthumously, he was awarded the Lasker Award, the nation's highest honor for medical science. Charlie Kelman spawned an empire based on his procedure that continues to thrive to this day. Phacoemulsification is the most common surgical procedure in the developed world. There are thousands of businesses that specialize in phaco, and hospitals nationwide have shut down their eye inpatient departments. Today, almost 100% of all cataract surgeries in the United States, nearly 3 million a year, are done using the techniques and tools pioneered by Charlie Kelman. Worldwide, the number is closer to 10 million.
When Charlie was first able to remove an unwanted tissue inside the human body through a small hole, he basically became the grandfather of all small incision surgery in the whole body. And because of ultrasound phaco and removing cataract through small incision, many surgeons ultimately went on to adopt that philosophy in removing unwanted tissue anywhere in the whole body.
Small incision cataract surgery using a manual technique derived from phaco is now the standard of care in the third world. In places like India, where the average age of cataract onset is 45, the economic effects are stunning. Men and women who might still be blind are now able to continue contributing to society, saving untold billions in healthcare costs.
Can you have problems? Sure, it's surgery. Can you lose eyes? Absolutely. I don't care who's doing it. But the vast majority of the time, it works. For the United States or for any industrialized nation where our lives depend upon our ability to see and to see well and to see well quickly, I think Charlie Kelman has changed the world.
The story of Charlie Kelman is an American story. It's the story of somebody going outside the tried and true, somebody considering new ways of thinking, new ways of doing.
He used to say he was lucky, but it wasn't luck that made him who he was. He had visions of grandeur, but a lot of people do, and they don't get there. And he got pretty close.
Thank you all for coming. You were really wonderful. I enjoyed this more than you did. And if there's any message, maybe it's that you should go out and do your own thing, whatever it is, and give in to that secret dream inside you. Whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong, whether I'll find a place in this life or never belong. I gotta be me. I got to be me. What else can I be but what I am? I can't be right for someone else if I'm not right for me. I gotta be free. Got to be free. Never try to do it all.
The loss of sight from disease is a threat that recognizes no racial, social, or economic boundaries. That's why for over a decade, the IRRF has supported clinician and research scientists worldwide in their efforts to discover the causes and cure of age-related macular degeneration, glaucoma, and other eye diseases that impair or destroy vision. Visit us at www.irrfonline.org. The International Retinal Research Foundation, saving sight through research.
For 65 years, Alcon has partnered with eye care professionals to preserve, restore, and enhance sight globally. Alcon continues to innovate in treatment of the world's leading cause of preventable blindness, cataracts.